The phone vibrated for the third time in less than a minute, and he turned it face down without looking. The meeting room was sealed, soundproofed, designed for decisions that didn't allow distraction. Men sat around the table waiting for his signal, watching his face the way people watched weather when they lived in fragile places. Maps lay open. Numbers glowed on screens. Control lived here. The phone vibrated again. He ignored it. "Continue," he said, eyes never leaving the document in front of him. Across the table, someone hesitated. "Boss, your phone." He lifted his gaze slowly. The room tightened. "If it mattered," he said calmly, "it would wait." The man nodded and continued speaking, voice steady but cautious. "Shipments. Territory. Problem that needed immediate correction." This was familiar ground. This was where he belonged. The phone stopped vibrating. For a moment, relief settled in his chest. The irritation faded. Whatever it was, another emotional message, another request, another reminder of a life he handled later, had passed. He didn't know yet that silence could scream. Hours earlier, his wife had sat alone on the edge of their bed, phone clutched in both hands. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and fear. The ultrasound image glowed softly on the screen. Still new, still unreal. She had typed carefully, "Please call me." No response. She tried again. "I need you." The typing bubble never appeared. Her fingers trembled as she erased the message and rewrote it. "It's about the baby." Still nothing. She stared at the image again, the small, unmistakable shape that had changed everything in an instant. The technician's face. The pause. The look that came before reassurance or concern. She swallowed and sent the image without words. Back in the meeting room, he signed his name with practiced confidence. Another problem solved. Another reminder of why people feared him. "Done," he said, standing. "We move tonight." The men nodded. Chairs scraped back. Phones came out. Life resumed. He picked up his phone at last. 3 missed calls. 6 unread messages. All from her. He frowned, irritation rising again. He told himself he would deal with it later. After the work, after the noise, after the part of his life that required strength instead of patience. Then he saw the image. His thumb froze. The room seemed to tilt, just slightly. He stared at the screen, at the blurred shape circled in white, at the timestamp beneath it. The image had been sent 27 minutes ago. No text, no explanation, just proof. Something cold slid into his chest. He tapped her name and waited. It rang. Once, twice. Voicemail. He hung up and tried again. Nothing. The men around him were talking again, laughing quietly, relieved tension spilling into casual confidence. He didn't hear them. He stood still, phone pressed to his palm, staring at the image as if it might change. A memory surfaced without permission. Her standing in the doorway weeks ago, hand resting unconsciously on her stomach, asking if he'd be home early. Him saying later, without looking up. He hadn't asked why. He hadn't noticed how pale she'd been. He called again. Voicemail. "Where is she?" he asked suddenly. The room went silent. Marco looked up. "Boss." "My wife," he said, voice flat. "Where is she?" "I thought she was home." "So did I." He turned and walked out, leaving the room behind without explanation. Phones came out instantly. Orders followed him down the hall. In the car, he stared at the image again. The longer he looked, the more wrong it felt. This wasn't an announcement. This wasn't excitement. This was urgency. "Drive," he said. The city blurred past, lights stretching into meaningless lines. He called her doctor's office. Closed. He called the house. No answer. A new message appeared on his screen. Not from her. From an unknown number. She came alone. His breath caught. "Faster," he said. The car accelerated. He typed with shaking fingers. "Where is she?" 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. "Hospital." She didn't want to worry you. The words burned. Didn't want to worry him. He pictured her sitting alone, hearing something she shouldn't have heard alone, making decisions she shouldn't have made alone. All while he silenced his phone. They reached the hospital in minutes that felt like hours. He moved through the doors without slowing, ignoring protests, ignoring rules that bent automatically in his presence. A nurse looked up, startled. "Sir." "My wife," he said. "Now." They led him down a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and fear. Every step echoed with something he couldn't name yet. He stopped outside a door. The ultrasound image glowed again in his mind. He realized then that power had not protected him from this moment. It had only delayed it. He reached for the handle, hand unsteady for the first time in years, and understood with brutal clarity that whatever waited on the other side of that door was something he could not control, and that he might already be too late. The door didn't open immediately. He stood there longer than he wanted to, longer than felt reasonable, listening to the faint rhythm of machines and footsteps beyond the wall. Hospitals had their own kind of silence, one that wasn't quiet, just controlled. Every sound meant something. Every pause carried weight. He knocked once, then pushed the door open. She sat upright on the bed, hands folded in her lap. Her coat lay draped over a chair, untouched. Her phone rested face down beside her, as if she had finally decided to stop waiting for it to answer back. She looked up when he entered. For a second, neither of them spoke. Her eyes were tired, not angry, not relieved, just tired in a way that came from holding fear alone for too long. "You came," she said. The words weren't an accusation. They weren't gratitude either. "I saw the image," he said, stepping closer. "Why didn't you call again?" She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't lift anything. "I did." He stopped beside the bed, suddenly unsure where to put his hands. He had commanded rooms full of men without hesitation. Now he couldn't decide whether to reach for her or stay still. "They said you were alone," he said. She nodded. "I didn't want to pull you out of your world." That stung more than if she had shouted. A doctor knocked softly and entered, clipboard tucked under one arm. He greeted them both, professional and calm, then glanced at the screen mounted on the wall. "We ran additional tests," the doctor said gently. "There were some irregularities." The word dropped into the room and stayed there. "I don't understand," he said. The doctor explained, carefully, slowly, using language meant to soften impact. Terms about timing and monitoring and possibilities that required immediate decisions. He heard only fragments. She listened to every word. "So what happens now?" she asked. "We need to observe," the doctor said. "Closely. Tonight." "And the baby?" she asked. The doctor paused. That pause was worse than any answer. "We're doing everything we can," he said. The doctor left, promising updates, closing the door behind him with quiet finality. The room felt smaller. He sat down heavily in the chair beside the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" She looked at him for a long moment. "I tried." He nodded slowly, shame settling into his bones. "I thought I had time," he said. "I thought." "You always do," she interrupted softly. "That's what scares me." He looked up then. "I wasn't trying to shut you out," she said. "I just didn't want to beg for space in your life." Her voice broke on the last word. "I should have answered," he said. "I should have been there." "Yes," she said. "You should have." There was no anger in it, just truth. Hours passed in fragments. Nurses came and went. Machines hummed. The city outside continued breathing, unaware of how narrow the world inside that room had become. He held her hand eventually, tentative at first, then firmer when she didn't pull away. Her grip was tight, as if anchoring herself to something solid at last. "I was scared," she said quietly, "and I hated that I was scared alone." He swallowed hard. "I'm here now." She nodded. "I know." But knowing wasn't the same as forgetting. Sometime after midnight, her phone buzzed. A message from her sister, asking for updates. She typed a short reply and set the phone aside again. He watched her do it, realizing how many moments like this he had missed without ever noticing. A nurse returned with results, speaking in careful tones. The situation hadn't worsened. That was all they could say for now. Relief washed through him, followed immediately by dread. Temporary relief was not safety. When the nurse left, he leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "I built everything to protect us," he said. "I thought that was enough." She turned her head toward him. "Protection isn't just walls and power," she said. "Sometimes it's answering the phone." The simplicity of it cut deeper than any threat ever had. He didn't argue. He stayed awake all night, listening to her breathing, counting heartbeats, afraid of the quiet that came between them. At dawn, the doctor returned with new instructions and cautious hope. Monitoring would continue. Decisions would follow. Nothing was certain yet. As light crept into the room, she closed her eyes briefly, exhaustion finally taking its toll. He watched her sleep and understood something he had avoided for years. Some silences were chosen, others were caused, and the ones you caused had consequences that no amount of power could undo. Time stopped behaving the way it should. Minutes stretched thin, pulling apart into pieces too small to measure. The clock on the wall moved, but the room didn't. It stayed suspended between one breath and the next, between what had already gone wrong and what might still be saved. He sat in the chair beside the bed, jacket folded neatly on the floor, sleeves rolled up as if that alone could make him useful. The machines kept their steady rhythm, indifferent to the tension they created. Each soft beep marked a heartbeat that wasn't his. Her breathing was shallow but even. She slept in fragments, drifting in and out, her face tightening sometimes as if pain passed through her dreams. He watched every change. This was unfamiliar territory. He was used to motion, orders given, actions taken, outcomes forced into place. Here there was nothing to do but wait. Waiting had never been his strength. A nurse came in quietly, checked the monitors, adjusted a line, then smiled politely before leaving again. No news, no reassurance, just continuation. He hated that word. Continue was what he said when meetings stalled, when people needed direction. Here it meant surrender. Her phone buzzed again on the small table. He glanced at it instinctively, then stopped himself. This time it wasn't for him to answer. She stirred, eyes opening slowly. "How long was I out?" "Not long," he said. She nodded, then winced slightly as she shifted. He was on his feet instantly, reaching out, then stopping halfway, unsure. "I'm okay," she said softly. He sat back down, hands clasped tightly together. "The doctor will be back soon." She studied him for a moment. "You're not used to this." "No," he admitted. "Waiting," she said. "Yes." She smiled faintly. "Neither am I." They sat in silence again, but it felt different now. Not empty, heavy with things neither of them said. "I almost didn't send the image," she said suddenly. He looked at her. "I stared at it for a long time," she continued. "I thought about adding words, explaining, apologizing for interrupting you, apologizing. I didn't want you to feel like you had to choose," she said. He frowned. "Choose? Between me and everything else?" she said quietly. The truth of it landed hard. "I already chose," he said. "I just didn't realize it." She didn't respond right away. "That's what scares me," she said finally. "How easy it was for you not to notice." He lowered his head, shame tightening his chest. Another hour passed. The light outside shifted from gray to pale gold. Morning edged closer, indifferent to what it illuminated. A different doctor came in this time, older, more careful with his words. He reviewed charts, nodded to himself, then looked at them both. "We're still in a holding pattern," he said. "The next few hours will tell us more." "What are the risks?" she asked. He answered honestly. He listened, absorbing every word, every possibility. He committed them to memory the way he committed threats and strategies. When the doctor left, he exhaled slowly. "I should call someone," he said. "Your sister." She nodded. "Please." He stepped out into the hallway to make the call. His voice was steady, controlled, even as he delivered the information. He promised updates. He promised presence. When he returned, she was watching the ceiling again. She's on her way, he said. Thank you. He sat back down, closer this time. You know, she said after a while, I used to imagine moments like this differently. How? He asked. I thought you'd be angry, she said. Or loud. Or in charge of everything. And now you look human, she said. He almost laughed. Almost. I don't feel human, he said. I feel useless. She turned her head toward him. Being here isn't useless. He met her gaze. You can't fix this, she said gently. I know that's hard for you. It is. But you can stay, she said. That matters. He nodded slowly. Another nurse came in, this time with a change in tone. Slightly more alert. Slightly more serious. Adjustments were made. Notes were written. Instructions were repeated. The room tightened again. Her hand found his without looking. He held it, firm and steady, as if anchoring both of them to the moment. I was afraid you'd walk in and try to take over, she said quietly. I wanted to, he admitted. She smiled weakly. I'm glad you didn't. Outside, footsteps echoed down the hall. Voices rose and fell. Somewhere, life continued at its normal speed. Inside, every second felt borrowed. He thought of all the times he'd told himself he'd call later, be home later, listen later, as if later were guaranteed. Later was a luxury. A doctor returned near noon, face unreadable. He delivered cautious updates. Small improvements, continued risk, nothing definitive. Hope and fear twisted together in his chest. After the doctor left, she squeezed his hand. Whatever happens, she said, voice barely above a whisper, don't disappear. I won't, he said immediately. Promise, she said. This time he didn't hesitate. I promise. The hours continued their slow march, refusing to speed up, refusing to resolve into certainty. But for the first time since the image appeared on his phone, he understood something clearly. The waiting wasn't punishment. It was instruction, teaching him the cost of silence, teaching him the weight of presence, teaching him that some moments didn't move for power, they waited to see who would stay. The room changed before anyone spoke. It wasn't sudden, no alarms, no raised voices, but he felt it in the way the air seemed to tighten, in the way the nurse paused a fraction longer than usual while checking the monitor. Experience had taught him to recognize shifts like this. Not in hospitals, but in rooms where decisions carried consequences. This was worse. The nurse excused herself, promising to return with the doctor. The door closed softly, leaving behind a silence that felt deliberate. She squeezed his hand. Something's different, she said. He nodded. I feel it too. Minutes passed, each one heavier than the last. The machines continued their steady rhythm, but now every sound felt amplified, like the room was leaning in to listen. When the doctor returned, he wasn't alone. Another doctor followed him, older, more composed, carrying a chart thicker than before. They stood at the foot of the bed, faces carefully neutral. We need to talk, the older doctor said. She pushed herself up slightly, wincing. He stood instinctively, then stopped when she shook her head. She wanted him close, not pacing. The doctor explained. There had been changes, subtle but concerning. The pregnancy was under stress. Waiting any longer carried risks they were no longer comfortable with. We have two paths, the doctor said gently. Neither is ideal. He listened, heart pounding, as the words unfolded. Intervention now, early, risky, uncertain. Or continued observation, with the chance that waiting might remove the option entirely. What are you recommending? She asked. The doctor hesitated. Medically? Intervention. And personally? She pressed. The doctor met her eyes. I'd want support. The weight of the room settled squarely on him. This wasn't a meeting he could dominate. There was no leverage, no pressure to apply, no force that would bend reality into compliance. This was choice in its rawest form. He felt the instinct rise, to decide quickly, to take control, to speak first. He stopped himself. She turned to him. What do you think? The question landed harder than any demand ever had. For years, she had adjusted around his world. Deferred. waited, carried uncertainty quietly while he chose power over presence again and again. Now she was asking not for an order but for partnership. He took a breath. Then another. I think, he said slowly, that whatever we choose it together. The doctors exchanged a glance. She studied his face, searching for old patterns, for certainty masquerading as control. She didn't find it. Are you afraid? She asked softly. Yes, he said without hesitation. The honesty surprised both of them. I'm afraid of making the wrong call, he continued. I'm afraid of pushing when we should wait, and waiting when we shouldn't. She nodded. Me too. The older doctor cleared his throat. We don't need an answer this second, he said. But we do need one soon. Soon. Another word he had abused. The doctor stepped out, giving them space that felt both merciful and cruel. She leaned back against the pillows, eyes closing briefly. I never wanted to be alone in this, she said. Not the fear. Not the decision. You aren't, he said immediately. Not now. She opened her eyes. Not later either? He met her gaze and held it. Never again. The promise felt different this time. Not dramatic, not desperate. Anchored. They talked quietly then. About possibilities. About what they feared most. About what they would regret more. Acting too soon or waiting too long. He didn't interrupt. Didn't redirect. Didn't minimize. He listened. That, more than anything, felt like the real choice. When the doctors returned, she was ready. We want to proceed, she said, voice steady. But we want to understand every step. The doctors nodded, relieved by clarity. He stood beside her as consent forms were explained. He asked questions, careful, precise ones, not to assert dominance but to protect understanding. As preparations began, reality pressed in. I need to make some calls, he said quietly. She nodded. But come back. I will. In the hallway he pulled out his phone. For once it wasn't a weapon or a shield. He canceled meetings without explanation. He delayed operations that would normally move without him. He told Marco, simply, everything waits. Marco didn't argue. When he returned to the room, she reached for his hand immediately, grounding herself in the certainty of his presence. I keep thinking, she whispered, about all the messages I didn't send before today. He swallowed. I keep thinking about the ones I didn't answer. They shared a look heavy with recognition. The nurses moved efficiently now, preparing her for what came next. The room filled with quiet purpose. Focus replaced uncertainty. As they wheeled her toward the procedure room, she gripped his hand tightly. Stay with me. I'm right here, he said, walking alongside her, refusing to let go until they made him. When the doors finally closed, separating him from her, he stood alone in the hallway, hands clenched, heart racing. For the first time in years, there was nothing he could do but wait. And for the first time, he understood that this waiting wasn't punishment. It was proof. Proof that some choices demanded humility. That real strength wasn't deciding for others, but standing with them when decisions were impossible. That ignoring a message could cost everything. And answering, truly answering, meant accepting responsibility for whatever came next. He leaned against the wall, eyes closed, and waited. Time fractured the moment the doors closed. He stood in the hallway, staring at the pale blue paint, listening to sounds he couldn't interpret. Wheels rolling, distant voices, the soft hiss of air systems working without pause. Hospitals hid urgency behind calm, and it made the waiting unbearable. He checked his phone without thinking. No messages. For the first time, that terrified him. He sat down slowly, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together so tightly his fingers ached. Around him, life continued in small, indifferent movements. A nurse walked past carrying charts. A man argued quietly into his phone. Somewhere, a baby cried sharp, alive, undeniable. The sound cut through him. Minutes passed. Or seconds. He couldn't tell. He replayed the last hours again and again, searching for a moment he could still fix. The instant he turned the phone face down, The calm certainty with which he'd said it can wait. The ease of that decision sickened him now. Everything he'd ever built had taught him that delay was safe. This delay was punishment. A nurse emerged from the procedure room briefly, speaking quietly to another doctor. He stood immediately. "Any update?" he asked. She looked at him kindly. Too kindly. "They're working," she said. "That's all I can tell you right now. Working." He nodded and sat back down, resisting the urge to pace. Control was useless here. He knew that. Still, his body resisted the truth. His phone buzzed suddenly. He flinched. A message from Marco. "All operations paused. Everyone's waiting on you." He didn't reply. For once, the world outside that hallway didn't matter. He stood and walked to the window at the end of the corridor. The city stretched below, distant and unreal. Cars moved. People hurried. Somewhere, deals were being made, threats issued, power measured. None of it reached him. He rested his forehead against the glass and closed his eyes. He thought of the first time she'd told him she was pregnant. How carefully she'd watched his face. How he'd smiled, kissed her forehead, promised protection. Protection. He'd thought it meant walls and money and influence. He hadn't realized it also meant presence. Another baby cried somewhere down the hall, then stopped. He checked the time. Only 12 minutes had passed. 12 minutes that felt like a lifetime. A doctor appeared at the end of the corridor, walking toward him with measured steps. His heart slammed into his ribs. He stood before the doctor reached him. "Is she?" His voice failed him. The doctor held up a hand gently. "We're still in the middle of it," he said. "There were complications. But they're managing." Managing. The word didn't comfort him. "Can I see her?" he asked. "Not yet." The doctor hesitated, then added, "She asked for you before we started." The words hit him harder than any diagnosis. He nodded, unable to speak, and watched the doctor disappear back through the doors. She had asked for him. Not earlier. Not later. Now. The minutes stretched again, each one dragging behind it the weight of everything he hadn't been when she needed him most. He sat back down and finally let his head drop into his hands. For the first time in years he prayed, not out loud, not with promises or bargains. Just a raw, desperate hope that he hadn't already lost the right to be there. Another 15 minutes. Then another. The hallway emptied. The crying baby was gone. The lights hummed softly, relentless. His phone buzzed again. He ignored it without looking. At last, the doors opened. The older doctor stepped out, mask lowered, eyes tired. He stood instantly. The doctor didn't speak right away. That pause was everything. "We did what we could," the doctor said finally. His chest tightened. And she's stable," the doctor continued. "Both of them are." The world rushed back into him all at once. He exhaled sharply, knees weakening, relief so sudden it almost hurt. "The baby," the doctor nodded. "Early, fragile, but alive." Alive. The word echoed through him, loud and overwhelming. "Can I see her?" he asked again, voice rough. "Yes," the doctor said, "but briefly." He followed the doctor through the doors, heart pounding with every step. The room beyond was bright and quiet, filled with controlled motion. She lay on the bed, pale and exhausted, eyes half open. She turned her head slightly when she saw him. "You stayed," she whispered. He moved to her side immediately, taking her hand carefully, afraid of hurting her. "I'm here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." Her fingers tightened weakly around his. "They took the baby?" she said softly, fear flickering through her voice. "I know," he said. "They're helping. They're doing everything they can." She nodded, eyes closing briefly in exhaustion. I thought I might not see you again," she said. His throat closed. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have answered. I should have been here sooner." She opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him. "Don't say it like that," she said. "Say it like you understand." He swallowed. "I understand." She studied him for a moment longer, then nodded, as if deciding something. Then stay. I will, he said. Always. A nurse gently reminded him they needed to move her. He squeezed her hand once more before stepping back, watching as they adjusted lines and monitors with practiced care. As they wheeled her away, she looked back at him. Don't ignore the next message, she said faintly. He managed a small, broken smile. Never again. When the room emptied, he stood alone once more. But this time, the silence felt different. Not accusatory. Instructive. The minutes that had changed everything were over. What came next would last a lifetime. The first thing he did after they moved her was silence his phone again. Not because he didn't care. Because this time he was choosing. He sat beside her bed in the recovery room, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest. The machines hummed softly, no longer threatening, just present. Nurses moved in and out with practiced calm, adjusting lines, checking numbers, offering quiet reassurance. He didn't follow them with his eyes. He watched her. She looked smaller than he remembered, paler, stronger in a way that had nothing to do with endurance and everything to do with having faced fear without armor. A nurse leaned in. You can stay a little longer, she said. But she needs rest. I'll be quiet, he replied. The nurse nodded and left them alone. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time still refused to behave, but he no longer fought it. Waiting no longer felt like weakness. Felt like responsibility. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Once, twice. He didn't look. She stirred slightly, brow furrowing as she surfaced from sleep. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then settling on him. You're still here, she murmured. Yes. Not of course. Not where else would I be. Just yes. Her lips curved faintly. Good. She closed her eyes again, trusting him to remain. That trust landed heavier than any command he had ever given. Outside the room, Marco waited, pacing quietly. He had been there for hours, managing everything the boss refused to touch. When the doctor finally stepped out and nodded at him, Marco exhaled in relief. They're stable, the doctor said. Both. Marco thanked him and glanced through the window at his boss sitting motionless beside the bed. He didn't interrupt. Later, when the nurse asked if he wanted coffee, he declined. He didn't want to leave, not even for a moment. Not now that he finally understood how moments slipped away when you assumed they would wait. Her sister arrived in the early evening, eyes red, steps hurried. She froze when she saw him, surprise flashing across her face. You came, she said. Yes, he replied. She studied him, searching for something: ego, defensiveness, justification. She found none. Thank you, she said quietly. He nodded, accepting it without claiming it. They spoke in low voices while she slept, filling gaps carefully. He didn't dominate the conversation. He listened. He answered questions honestly. He didn't minimize the fear or soften the truth. When her sister left, she squeezed his arm once. She needed you, she said. I know, he replied. I should have known sooner. Night settled in. The hospital lights dimmed slightly, signaling rest, recovery, patience. He remained where he was, phone untouched, attention undivided. When the doctor returned with an update about the baby, still fragile, still fighting, he listened closely, asked questions, wrote things down. He committed every detail to memory. This was what attention looked like. Not control, presence. When she woke again, fully this time, she looked at him with clear eyes. Did you answer them? She asked softly. No, he said. Her brows knit together. Your people. They can wait. She studied him for a long moment. You mean that? Yes. She reached for his hand, fingers warm and real. I didn't send the image to scare you, she said. I sent it because I didn't know how else to reach you. He tightened his grip gently. You reached me. But it shouldn't have taken that, she said. No, he agreed. It shouldn't have. They sat in silence then, but it wasn't the silence that accused or punished. It was the kind that allowed understanding to settle without resistance. I don't need you to change overnight, she said quietly. I just need to know what you'll answer first next time. He didn't rush the response. My phone, he said slowly, will never come before you again. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She nodded. That was enough. Later, after she drifted back to sleep, he finally checked his phone. Dozens of messages, missed calls, urgent updates, problems waiting to be solved. He typed a single response to Marco. I'll call tomorrow. Handle everything. Marco replied almost instantly. Understood. He set the phone aside. For the first time in his life, he understood that power wasn't measured by how many people waited for you. It was measured by who you refused to make wait. As dawn approached, he stood and stretched, stiff and exhausted. He leaned down and kissed her forehead gently, careful not to wake her. I'm here, he whispered, even though she couldn't hear it. In the NICU down the hall, a small life fought quietly, unaware of the decisions that had almost cost it everything. He would be there too. Not later. Not when things calmed down. Now, when the sun rose and the city woke, his world did not rush back in. It waited outside hospital walls, finally placed where it belonged. He sat back down beside her, took her hand again and stayed, because the first message he chose to answer, from this moment forward, would always be the one that mattered most.